Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the Russian-Ukrainian war. And today, we got confirmation that, from the U.S. Air Force, in fact, that the Ukrainians are now in possession of the JDAM, the Joint Direct Attack Munition. So what does that mean? What is a JDAM? Is it some sort of newfangled weapon system that is going to change the dynamics of the ongoing war? Possibly, depending on how they're used and how many of them they're given, meaning the Ukrainians are given. So what is the JDAM? Well, essentially, you take a standard U.S. dumb bomb, say a 500-pound bomb, and then specifically the Ukrainians have been given the JDAM ER, extended range. So this means that there is an upgrade kit for this bomb. This bomb is given GPS receivers, it is given a guidance kit, and it's also given wings for the extended range version. And what happens is a plane, in theory, a Ukrainian aircraft, or a U.S. F-35, could drop a JDAM well away from the front line. The theory is that Ukrainian, maybe MiG-29, Su-27, Su-24, can fly at very low altitude, heading east towards Russian lines with a JDAM, rapidly gain altitude at high speed, and then toss the JDAM towards Russian lines coming from low altitude. The problem for the Ukrainians is if they attack with the traditional method that the U.S. uses of a high altitude attack, they are at risk of being shot down by Russian S-400s or Russian fighter aircraft. So again, the theory is that the Ukrainians would take whatever jet they are using, they'll come in at low altitude, rapidly gain altitude, pitch up, high speed, and toss the JDAM, which will then reach apogee. It will extend its wings and then glide anywhere 40 to 70 kilometers towards a target on the front line. So why are these more effective than, say, a HIMARS? Well, they pack more explosive. A 500-pound bomb, or a 1,000-pound bomb, or a 2,000-pound bomb, depending on what the Ukrainians have received. I suspect they have been given all of the above, but they contain a lot more explosive power than a HIMARS or some of the multiple launch rocket systems that the Ukrainians are currently using. So it gives it more explosive power, and some believe that the JDAM, quite possibly at least the extended range version of the JDAM with the glide wings, could reach out to 100 kilometers, maybe even more. There are rocket boosters that they can attach to these systems, and again, depending on the altitude and the speed of the aircraft, the JDAM is going to go downrange quite a distance. So that's the theory, and then what happens is prior to the JDAM being released or put on the aircraft, or while it's on the aircraft, the strike coordinates are entered into that bomb, the GPS coordinates. So for instance, if I would like to attack this crossroads here, put a bomb right there, I could do that with a JDAM. And again, there's no, it's essentially fire and forget. You release the bomb somewhere some dozen kilometers, if not more, many more, from the front line. And again, the bomb simply glides itself to that target and then very, very precisely hits that target. That's what made the B-2 stealth bomber so effective. It carries 16 2,000-pound GPS bombs. But it's not just a traditional attack method where the B-2 goes over a target and drops 16 2,000-pound bombs. It drops 16 2,000-pound JDAMs. And each of these JDAMs can strike a very specific target over a fairly wide range. So you could fly over a city, you could hit various power stations, you could hit various, again, one B-2 bomber can hit a power station, it can hit command and control centers, and a variety of targets, 16 targets with those 2,000-pound bombs, even more if they go with smaller JDAMs. And each one of those are individually targeted munitions going after a very specific target when they're in glide mode. So it'll be interesting to see how the Ukrainians use these systems, if they can use these systems. I would suspect they've already been used. I also suspect, and I have long suspected, that this could be cover for direct Western involvement in this conflict. It would not surprise me if we fast forward 20 years in history and we finally find out that U.S. F-35s could have been directly involved in this conflict. How would the Russians know? It would be very difficult for the Russians to know, given the situation on the ground and the way the battlefield looks right now, especially if the Ukrainians are being handed the JDAM, then that gives plausible deniability to the United States to use these JDAMs if they needed to, meaning via an F-35. So the question is, what happens next? And we just don't know at this point. We don't know how many JDAMs the Ukrainians have, and again, just how effectively they are going to deploy those systems. A lot of what the Ukrainians are aiming at with these JDAMs are target sets that have been provided to the Ukrainians by the United States. The United States has the satellites. The United States has the intel. Now, obviously, the Ukrainians have their own intel. They have their own drones. They have their own people on the ground that can give human intelligence as well. So that's factored in. But a lot of these strikes against Russian targets, specifically the JDAM strikes, the HIMARS strikes, this is being done with American technology. The ability of American satellites to see what's happening on the ground and then to relay that data to those Ukrainian weapon systems. And that's what's happening. So we'll see just how many of these have been delivered, how many will be used, and just how the Ukrainians are using them. My best guess, if it is the Ukrainians that are using them, they are retrofitting Su-24s, MiG-29s, Su-27s, maybe even Su-25s to launch these attacks against Russian targets. Additionally, I also wanted to talk about very, very briefly the Leopard 1 that the Ukrainians are going to be receiving. It looks like the Ukrainians could receive more Leopard 1s than some of the other main battle tanks that are currently talked about being delivered. We know that Abrams are on the horizon, the distant horizon. We know that the Challenger will probably get there fairly quickly, the Challenger 2. We know Leopard 2s are going to get there eventually. We also know that, again, Leopard 1s are going to get there. And I believe this tank is kind of getting the back burner treatment. It's being talked about, being matched up against, say, T-62s, older T-62 model Russian tanks that have been taken out of a mothball and redeployed to the front line. Well, I'm going to tell you something, and I'm probably going to receive a little bit of heat for this. But if I had the choice as a tanker of being in and operating an upgraded Leo 1, maybe with some additional armor. Obviously, they can upgrade the 105 millimeter round. Can load those guns a bit quicker than the 120. They're lighter. Now, obviously, when the round discharges on the 120, all you get is an aft cap. You don't get the full shell. So in regards to that, you do get the full 105 casing that comes back. But outside of that, the Leopard 1 is a good tank. I know if we look back through history, if we look at, say, the wars between Israel and Syria that were fought in Lebanon, the Merkava 1 was a 105 millimeter armed, had a 105 gun on it. And it did fine against T-72s. Obviously, T-72 Mike 1s that the Syrians had. But they were penetrating the frontal aspect of T-72s just fine. Now, we don't think that those early Syrian T-72s had reactive armor on them, but nonetheless, they were winning frontal aspect engagements. Same as in Iraq, U.S. Marine M60A3s with 105s were defeating frontal shots of T-72s. Now again, not all tank engagements are the same. It's not always about the frontal aspect shot. And I would wager that a 105 tungsten armored piercing fin stabilized discarding sabot will penetrate the side aspect on any part of a T-72, a T-80, T-90. You know, ballistics are a funny thing, and we have the stat boys that say, well, this main gun and this round penetrates or has a certain level of penetration, and we think of that as absolute. And you can't do that. You can't. I would not want to be, especially in some of these engagements that are taking place in this conflict with these forested areas between fields, where you're having tank engagement range sometimes up to 100 meters. So if I'm even in a T-90 and a Leopard 1 gets first shot off at 100 yards, 200 yards, 500 yards, there's a high probability if I'm in that T-90 or T-72, I'm going to be killed or die. Because again, ballistics are funny. You may believe that 105 millimeter round will glance off the armor or won't achieve a penetration. But the reality is, depending on the angle of the shot, the distance of the shot, where all the heavens are aligning, they will, and they can, and you just don't know, because again, ballistics are incredibly funny. You can't computate what's going to happen with tank-on-tank engagements. You just can't. So again, I would not rule these Leopard 1s out of the game. They have upgraded thermal imaging sights, TIS. They, again, can fire at a fairly high rate of fire, smaller 105 millimeter rounds, depending on the rounds. Is it heat? Is it sabot? Difficult to say, but again, they're incredibly accurate rounds as well. I would rather be shooting, in terms of if I was doing a tank gunnery competition, And I had the choice again of either being in a Leo 1 or a T-72 or a T-80 or T-90. I get I'm biased, and I'm biased for a reason, but I would pick the Leo 1. I really would. And just, again, crew comfort, and I even believe survivability is probably on the side of the Leo 1, the upgraded Leo 1s. You can add additional armor to those Leo 1s. I imagine they are. But again, in the scope of this war, it's not always tank versus tank. In all probability, the first Russian unit that gets a kill on a Leo 1 is not going to be another Russian tank. It could be something else. It could be an anti-tank guided weapon system. It could be an aircraft. It could be a piece of artillery. It could be a kamikaze drone. You just don't know. But again, if I had my choice of either being in a 72 variant T-80, T-90 or a Leo 1, I'm going to have to go with the Leo 1. I just am. But that's it for today. We are going to continue our coverage of exactly what's happening on the ground. Again, status quo right now in Bakhmut. There has been not a lot of updates. We are hearing that Ukrainian forces are, the Ukrainians are bringing additional forces in an attempt to maintain hold of Bakhmut. And we anticipate that the Russians are probably doing the same. This just continues to be a continued bloodbath in this area. So we'll continue to watch. We will continue to report. Thanks for joining us today. More to come very, very soon. Have a good day.